Promptly at 11 a.m. Thank you very much. James Brown, have a seat. He's from our local chapter, so I know him well. All right. We'd like to welcome Dr. Ian O'Neill. He's a solar physicist turned space science producer for Discovery News, and he previously worked for Universe Today and Space Lifestyle Magazine and Mars Foundation. You can also check out his space blog at astroengine.com. Show you that. And he's an avid tweeter on Twitter. That's kind of hard to say. Please welcome Dr. Ian O'Neill. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucinda. As Lucinda said, I'm the space science producer for Discovery News, and I have a vested interest in Mars colonization efforts because my early days were... Bring it closer. Okay. So when I first moved to the States, I started to work for the Mars Foundation, headed by Bruce McKenzie, who's been doing some talks in this convention as well. And I was here last year, and of course, I bored you all stupid with, you must use Twitter, you must use social media, and I'm very happy to see a lot of people have converted, so this is good. And there's going to be a small portion of my talk from last year because I've got an extra 15 minutes, so I kind of latched it on the end. I'm sure you won't mind. So basically, for this talk, in fact, it was very apt for last night's Science and the Media panel that I did. And there's a few crossovers here, and basically I just want to talk about my experiences in the past year with Mars-related stories with Discovery News, because of course we run a lot of Mars stories, and thank goodness it's a very, very popular topic with the public. So I thought I'd share some of our statistics that we've noticed, some of the trends that we've seen, and why I think some of these stories are really popular, and perhaps you can use them for your own efforts. And as was mentioned last night on the panel, it's good to not only report on your own stuff, but also latch on to other news in space and other news in Mars science, and discuss it, have a voice, talk about these new advances, and try and find some common link with your own work. And this is key, I think, for the Mars Society, with any non-profit group who needs to get their message out there. So of course, using Twitter, using Facebook, using social media is very important, but also you need to blog about these things. You need to actually produce stuff yourself. You need to get more press releases out there. So if I can share some of the things I've discovered in the past year, and I've also got 3 examples of how to connect Earth with Mars, and then perhaps bring the public on board as well. And then I've got a little extra at the end that if you were here last year, you'll probably recognize. Okay, so tapping Mars into the public mindset. Obviously, that's our key goal, and that's been mentioned quite a few times on this one convention. First things first, we know that space science is dominated by politics, and that's been acutely important for the examples like the James Webb Space Telescope that's currently undergoing a hammering in Congress. Also, the shuttle replacement, that was the Constellation program cancelled. It was all politics. We don't really know what was right, what was wrong. Ultimately, history will tell us whether this was actually a space crossroads. Perhaps the commercial sector can take over where NASA's left off, or perhaps NASA's got an awful lot more to do before it can hand over properly to the commercial sector. So it's set deeply in politics, and the only way you can really change that is through engaging the public and ultimately getting the right people elected into positions of power. So, as I say, engaging the public in space science is key, and especially in this convention in Mars science, Mars topics. Bring it into the public arena and get it discussed. Ultimately, it can change policy. One example recently was, of course, if you've been following the news with SETI, they had to close down the Allen telescope array. They had to mothball it. The brand new telescope array is going to do amazing science. It's going to be looking for extraterrestrial civilizations. It's going to look further than ever before. Unfortunately, it's a privately funded, well, publicly funded organization. It's a charity. So they ran out of money. And in current economic times, that's a real big problem. So it looked like the ATA was going to be closed down for good. So this group from Silicon Valley set up this group called SETI Stars. And literally just before I came out, I just found that they'd actually raised the funds they wanted, and they managed to raise $200,000 within the 60-day time frame they set. And they purely use social media. They use social media, they reached out to the public, said, look, this is a really important endeavor. Perhaps we should start funding this thing. And it was just through like $100 donations. A few people dropped in like $50,000 donations. And it was a really good way of using the media, social media, to actually develop an interest in this underfunded field. And so hopefully the ATA is back online. Don't know how long, but at least this is a good step in the right direction. Science media is changing. I think you probably noticed on the panel last night there were a range of guys from the media. I mean, I'm science media. We had a guy from Yahoo News, which is very much new media, and we had two guys that are very established in CNN and National Public Radio. And it was quite interesting to chat to them after, and just how we all call the same things by different names. It's like, I think new media was mentioned several times. I used that word new media back in 2006. Now I consider it the media. So things are changing at different paces, and the mainstream media is very mixed. Some things are done right, some things are done wrong. Science media websites like Discovery News and New Scientist and all these, like Discover Magazine, I think we're on the right track. It's by no means perfect, but I think we're using all the tools at our disposal pretty well now. We also have to be aware we don't want to, sensationalize science all the time. I mean, there's certain things that are quite sensational. I mean, like going to Mars, sending the one-way trip to Mars. That is a sensational story, and of course we're going to latch onto that because we're going to send a human to Mars to end his days on Mars. That's sensational. But there's people talking about this. This is a story that's actually worth telling, but we need to know where the boundaries are between science accuracy and sensationalism. I mean, Discovery News, as I say, isn't perfect. Sometimes we don't get it right, but I'd like to think we get it right more times than we don't. Also, this will be very good for you guys. You need to find the hook in your research, in your group, in your story. What's the story that you're trying to tell about Mars, and where is the hook? What will make that interesting to the common man? Because space science is a very big topic. How do you actually communicate that to everybody? So you need to find the hook, and hopefully with a few of these examples I'll be able to explain where to find them. Social media has a role to play. As you know, I love social media, I love Twitter, so I think that's a given. I just want to give you some tips on the organization website or group, and I want to give you some examples. So, first of all, I want to discuss Mars in the news. So I'm going to go over a few of the top stories from the past, since January of this year, give you an idea of what kind of traffic they receive. It was going to be a top 10, but I realized I didn't have a 2-hour presentation, so I've gone down to the top 5. Why are they so popular? That's the key thing. I want to just try and explain from my point of view why I think they're popular. All right, in the second part of the talk, I just want to talk about the Earth-Mars connection. It's very difficult sometimes to communicate space science because it's very much out there. If you can find a topic that kind of bridges the gap between Earth and Mars, or Earth and space science in general, you've made a connection with the public, and that's when the mainstream media takes notice. The title of my talk, Space Beer, is very prominent. Space Beer is probably one of my most popular stories inadvertently. I mean, I love beer. So space, I love space. So connecting the two seemed like a no-brainer to me. But to the tabloid press, they went crazy over it because they probably had the same connection. And I approached it from a scientific point of view, whereas perhaps the mainstream media wouldn't. But still, there is a connection there to be made between the mainstream media, the tabloid press, and science media. And ultimately, the bit at the end, I'm going to talk about getting the message out there. Of course, social media is key in this. And there's going to be a story of a little bat that I tend to talk about an awful lot. And if you weren't at my presentation last year, I think you enjoy it. So if you're at my presentation last year, at that point, you can go for a break if you don't want to hear about the story of the bat. As was mentioned again in the panel last night, media acts almost like a filter between science and the public. And again, sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not so good, sometimes it's science is sensationalized, which isn't such a good thing, but we need to form a better link between the science and the public. Because to digest often complex science, you need an expert in that place or an expert journalist who actually knows that field very well to translate it through the media filter to the public. And it goes both ways, because the science community don't always know what the public is really interested in hearing about. I mean, I've spoken to scientists who have done some fantastic work, and they don't think that it's actually that interesting. I spoke to an undergraduate student a couple of years ago in a conference, and he was working on modeling supernova explosions below the disk of a galaxy, and he found out that one lobe of the supernova explosion would be smaller than the other. And I was just going, oh, this is amazing. And he just didn't understand why that was amazing, because all he saw was mathematical equations. I saw an amazing picture of this supernova remnant with one lobe bigger than the other. And I thought that was a brilliant hook for a great story. Unfortunately, he didn't contact me again. He didn't want to share his story. So that's going to go into a journal somewhere and probably not get mentioned ever again. So that's the shame. So the media needs to be aware to let science know what the public really wants and how they can advance their message and ultimately, again, change policy, get more funding. And it's only when you start getting the public interested in certain outreach goals you can actually make this happen. And also being a scientist myself, back in 2006, I'm acutely aware of how difficult it is to get funding and how easy it is to forget about this part of the equation. Ultimately, political change. We need to go to Mars. I mean, we've been talking about it for, well, forever. So we need to get this changed. Okay, so Mars in the news, the top 5. I'm going to give a quick brief outline of the story and why I think it went popular or viral. Okay, this was quite a catchy article, and it's totally accurate. How a mission to Mars could kill you. This was written probably in July, only recently, and it soon took off. I mean, obviously the title is quite inflammatory in itself, but our writer spoke to scientists, spoke to engineers, spoke to NASA, spoke to the European Space Agency, spoke to all these experts, and came to the conclusion that it's quite unhealthy to go to Mars. But there's a few reasons why we shouldn't discount it, which was a good thing, so I wouldn't let it run on the website. So obviously the dangers associated with manned mission to Mars are formidable. That's one thing we're discussing. That's one thing we're trying to mitigate by getting everybody together from all disciplines to discuss how we can safely get a man to Mars. Second point, could space radiation, microgravity, and psychological implications push the red planet beyond our reach? And that's really the gist of what we're trying to find out. But ultimately, through his research, he came across a lot of Mars advocates, a lot of scientists, a lot of engineers who are trying to mitigate all these problems. And this is it turned into quite an exciting article. It kind of started off kind of a little bit scary, and it ended up like, we can actually do this. There's a lot of advanced shielding techniques that we're looking into. There's genetic therapies. I didn't actually think about the biological side, how you can actually change the human body to deal with a high radiation environment. If it is really the showstopper. I mean, there's a big debate as to whether radiation is really as scary as it sounds. Of course, diet, big thing. So it turned into a very interesting discussion. And funny enough, we received very positive feedback. And it wasn't the negativity that I thought, because often with these articles you get, what's the point of going to Mars? Obviously it's kind of scary, people are going to die, we can't afford the risk. In this case, in this article, it was more, yes, you've outlined the problems with Mars, we've got the solutions, it's only a matter of time before we work out a cheap way and a safe way of doing it. And that was really cool, because often with our articles, the comment boxes become more interesting in the article itself, because you get a public forum going underneath the articles. And now we've got quite good traffic coming to our site. We also get a vast range of views, often very political views, but sometimes that's not a bad thing. Sometimes that gets a good discussion going. So that particular article got 21,000 hits very quickly. And of course, that was only last month. So number 4 in 2011, of course, was the story of Spirit. The poor thing, dead. NASA decided on May 24th to call off the search and rescue plan. A lot of our readers really did want us to rescue it, so a manned mission suddenly became very tempting to send in the troops and pick out the Mars rover. And funny enough, I got another slide later that will actually show how you could do that. So, you know, it was very emotive. Everybody was behind this little Spirit rover. Funny enough, more so for Spirit than Opportunity. I don't really hear much about Opportunity now, not very many press releases about Opportunity, which is a shame because actually Opportunity was always my favorite. But Spirit did its job and ultimately died. As I say, massive public support for this one. If we publish anything on Spirit, you know, you get floods of traffic. Opportunity, not so much. But because obviously Spirit's had quite a lot of issues along the way. So it slipped into hibernation in March 2010 after getting stuck in Troy in Gustav Crater in April 2009. And ultimately it ran out of, it got dusty. It was the wrong angle to the sun to actually heat up. And unfortunately it didn't actually come out of hibernation and it stopped transmitting. So they couldn't actually couldn't find the beat. So it didn't make sense to be looking for it anymore anyway. Spirit became a symbol of tenacity to the public, the little rover that could. And I think little stories like this go a long way. And we will always run stories where there'll be a robotic mission or a manned mission. You know, you can't get better than this story. As I say, every Spirit story is popular. And really the hook here is it's a little rover on an alien world. And it had a personality. And to be honest, we have to thank NASA an awful lot for the social media impact that this mission had. You know, we'd always have these tweets. I think it was first person from the rover directly. And of course, when you start personalizing a robot, you're going to start getting kind of attached to it. And that's certainly what our audience did. They got very attached to that little rover. Oh, and this is my my theory on what actually happened. On April 1st, I ran a picture of what could have happened. I mean, Mars not dissimilar to Tatooine. The Jawas, they need some scrap metal. Obviously, there's plenty of scrap metal there. So that one didn't go down so well. I was surprised. I thought it would get a few laughs, but people were a little bit insulted. I think it was a little bit too soon, April 1st. Okay, and of course, with science media, you're always going to come across the conspiracy theories. You're always going to come across the doomsday theories. I've excelled in writing too many articles about the 2012 phenomenon, as we call it, debunking all these silly science ideas that we're going to die this time next year. But also that goes for Mars. We get a fairly big influx of articles about people with strange theories about Mars. And this was one that kind of hits the mainstream media before it came across my desk. And I just felt compelled to debunk it because it was silly. But it was fun as well. So basically, an armchair astronaut discovered a base on Mars. There's a lot of this going on. Basically, he looked very, very closely at Mars images. I think it was actually on Google Earth, Google Mars. He was scanning the Martian surface and found this base, which was about 100 meters long. Not the arrow. The arrow wasn't there. That little thing there, that little smudge. And, you know, that could be a Mars base. But who put it there? Well, he obviously thought there was some sort of black ops NASA was running. You know, nobody would notice all these rockets launching a Mars base to Mars. So he didn't even think it was aliens. I thought the alien car would come out, but it wasn't. He really did think NASA had a black ops mission on Mars. It was, in fact, a cosmic ray track across the CCD. And, of course, being a solar physicist, I was always looking at these solar images. And, of course, a lot of these solar missions are looking at the sun all the time. And so you often get a lot of interference from high-energy particles. And this is a classic example of a track across the CCD. I mean, we didn't discount it out of hand. You know, I looked at all the evidence. A lot of our readers chipped in as well. A lot of our readers did extra analysis of the images just to prove that it was a particle track and nothing man-made. So this was an engaging topic. And I don't think it's a bad thing to discuss these conspiracy theories because I think it's a way of communicating often, you know, confusing science to quite a mundane problem like, you know, a streak on a Martian picture. As I say, I treated it as an opportunity because it was good to then discuss where the image came from, what kind of effort went, you know, what actually causes this this streak, why, and of course then I brought in a bit about Mars colonization, you know, traveling to the red planet is obviously quite risky because there's a lot of cosmic rays, a lot of radiation. And this is a physical example of that radiation causing a smudge on a CCD. So I thought it was a good opportunity to discuss. It was easy to debunk, obviously. It was like, you know, shooting fish in a barrel, but it was engaging and it got the public interested. And as I say, this is another example of a good discussion underneath the article in the comments section where people were throwing insults at each other, but doing some analysis as well and swearing at me. It was good fun. Oh, and this was my happiest moment of the year, I think, when I actually went to see Mars rover Curiosity, the Mars Science Laboratory in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, because I just live around the corner, and I got this invite to go there. So I just went there with my camera. Bill Nye was there, like all these prominent people from the media were there, and we got to actually get within arm's reach of the rover. And I put together a slideshow, and of course any story about robots on Mars, and I think we got to thank Spirit and Opportunity for that. Even this nuclear-powered monster is really ugly and up close, but I think that it's going to have a similar effect as the Spirit and Opportunity had, and still having with Opportunity. And of course, this was very popular. We had 44,000 hits very, very quickly. They all wanted to see me in a bunny suit with my thumbs up, so it was good. And now, without a doubt, the biggest story of the year for us was the reanalysis of the Viking data. The Viking landers, of course, from the 1970s, they discovered something odd in the soil, but of course the controversy raged for 30 years and it was never really resolved. But of course, using recent data from the Phoenix Mars lander, finding out there's perchlorate, I can never say it, but basically rocket fuel in the soil, that it kind of skewed the results from Viking. And so by using more recent data, they were able to say, okay, well, perhaps the Viking probes did actually discover organics on the Martian surface. And of course, any mention of organics or any mention of searching for life on Mars, that always gets a huge buzz. And this particular story, because it's got one hell of a history with it, I think that's why we got that 250,000 hits. And this basically went viral. I mean, this was an originally reported item by our space correspondent, and she basically went after it herself. And of course, some major news outlets picked it up. So that's where we actually influenced the mainstream news, and I was quite proud of that. Of course, it was a cool story. So that was really the top five articles. Really, number one was the Viking story, but there were many, many more besides. I mean, we're running Mars stories every other day, but these were really the top five. And if you can take anything from that, it's an interesting thing to look at the statistics that we get from Mars stories. Definitely one of the more popular topics on Discovery News. Okay, so to communicate space science effectively, I find if you can find some sort of terrestrial example or some sort of everyday thing to connect the public into space, I find it very valuable, because people are able to look at say, I mean, of course, space beer. Who doesn't love space beer? So they're able to say, look, I like beer. You think we're going to drink it in space? That's quite a cool story. I'm going to read about this. And then you can drop in some other topics like, well, you know, cultivating food in space. You know, how are we actually going to manufacture beer in space? So you can actually then talk about Mars colonization, self-sufficient colonies, and people suddenly find it very interesting. They're starting to think about drinking, you know, homemade beer on the top of Olympus Mons, and that's no bad thing. So don't leave your empties, because that's not good. So space beer, very important. Who doesn't love it? Really, I should say Ian loves it, because I don't know if you all like space beer. But as I say, ambush with science. So you've got a fairly everyday substance here, beer. You've linked it with space, and then you can throw in all this other good stuff. So with the Mars Society could talk, that would be a good opener in a presentation for Mars colonization and why we should all drink on Mars. Why not? implications for Mars colonization. Now, the two main stories I've covered in the last 4 years, there's been quite a lot of buzz about space beer, but there's been two major separations. The first one is cultivation of produce in space to produce beer. Unfortunately, we haven't actually produced beer in space yet, but we have actually used ingredients grown in space. And that's some significant science that was actually done on the International Space Station. And also, most recently this year, cultivation of produce for space. So basically, we're producing this beer to optimize it for space travel. So it's kind of the other way of looking around. And so, of course, the space tourism trend at the moment is kind of motivating this, because people are thinking, well, you know, it'd be nice if our tourists can actually have a beer in zero gravity. But there's a few issues with that, as I'll talk about now. So first of all, the first example that actually came up in 2008, 2009, and that was actually using produce grown in space. So third generation barley was grown on the International Space Station in 2006, I think, and it was brought back to Earth. And it was then picked up by a joint Russian-Japanese space experiment on the International Space Station. And it was purely a study into sustainability of food cultivation in space. So the space barley was grown, and from third generation it was grown in space. They found there was no DNA change from terrestrial barley to space barley. And so they thought, okay, well, we can probably do something with this. So in 2008, the Japanese brewing company Sapporo thought, this might be a good outreach opportunity for us. You know, it's a good marketing ploy. We're going to actually brew some space beer from this third generation barley. So they produced 100 liters. I don't think they sold it, but they got like 60 people in to taste the stuff, and it became a world phenomenon. I mean, the tabloids went nuts over this. You know, you're able to drink space beer. And of course, for me, this was a fantastic opportunity, because this is the first I heard about it. It was through the tabloid. I think it was on the front of the Sun newspaper in the UK. You know, people are drinking beer actually grown from ingredients in space, and I think they're kind of concerned about, you know, they're going to have some sort of alien bug in them. But of course, that's tabloids for you. So it was up to the science media to really grab on board and connect the dots between the two, because of course, tabloids, they're only looking at space beer. They thought how cool it is to be drinking space beer. And of course, science in general, the whole reason why we did this was to examine the possibilities of growing foodstuffs in space. And it wasn't only barley, it was like celeries, all these different kinds of grain that they were growing, just to test to see what happens to this produce in space. And as it turns out, it was all very successful, and you know, there was no real difference in the produce grown in space as it was on Earth. So, you know, the science opportunity was there, obviously. So we ran a series of articles. I did, like, interviews on the radio. It went absolutely crazy. The unfortunate thing is, of course, this stuff isn't for consumption in space. This is normal beer. It's just produced with space produce. So it's one hell of a buzz, and it's purely a marketing ploy, but it gets the science out there, and I quite like that connection. Also, it's not brewed in space. We're not there yet. But in the second example, actually producing space beer for space, for the space tourism industry, there's a few issues, and I'll go into that now. But in 2010, astronauts for hire, they started test flying beer on the zero-G parabolic flights. It sounds like a bit of a jolly, because I think I'd probably sign up for that any day. And that these guys were actually paid to do what they were doing. And so basically they go up, they drink the beer and see what happens. I don't think there are any accidents, but the curious thing with beer in space, I don't know if you've probably guessed it already, is the phenomenon. I mean, it sounds quite trendy when you call it the wet burp phenomenon, but it's not pretty. Basically, when you drink carbonated produce in space, on Earth, you know, if you drink a beer, you drink it, the liquid drops to the bottom under gravity, the gas comes to the top and you burp it, and there's no issue, you know, you just get some funny looks in the pub. Whereas in space, if you burp, because of course you're going to swallow the fluid, it's filled with carbon dioxide, the carbon dioxide is going to want to get out of the fluid. It doesn't get out, it just mixes with it. So your stomach's expanding, you have to burp. So you burp, so you throw out a lot of wet contents, whatever's in your stomach at the time. So you become very, very unpopular with your colleagues in space. And this isn't a good thing for space tourism. This is terrible. I mean, who would want, you know, Virgin Galactic with all these people swigging, you know, a 4X and then barfing in the cabin. I mean, it's just not conducive to space tourism. So, of course, this was all very interesting to astronauts and hire. So they volunteered and they went up in the Vomit Comet. And I don't think they vomited, which was good. But they were actually testing different types of beer for not only carbon dioxide content, but also for taste. So basically, Four Pines Brewing Company, another very marketing savvy beer company, thought, okay, we can jump on this. So they hired astronauts to actually get their data and try and work out what was what they found was the best beer to be drinking in space. And they found a type of stout because when I did an interview with Leroy Chow, astronaut, I think he spent quite a lot of time on the space station, but he was a space shuttle mission specialist, I believe. I spoke to him about what it's like to eat in space. What's the main thing you notice? And he said, well, when the first couple of days, his taste buds kind of got really, really excited. So everything he ate, it was like an explosion in his mouth. It was like he could eat something very bland like white bread, and he'll taste everything in it. But then as time went on, he found that very, very tasty food became very bland, and he was actually craving the Russian food that was actually very, very strong. And they addressed this with the beer, and they were thinking, well, if you just take a lager into space, you're not really going to taste it. It's just going to taste like fizzy water. So they decided on a kind of a stout. So it's very heavy, very, very full of taste. But they also reduced the carbon dioxide to deal with this wet burp phenomenon. They didn't get rid of it entirely because I don't think flat beer is good in space or on Earth. But they did keep some of the carbon dioxide in it, and they also boosted the taste by having a stout-based beer. And of course, tabloids went nuts again. I mean, this Vostok beer named after the Yuri Gagarin spaceship, this took off. This was like brilliant. I actually got in contact with them hoping to get some samples, but they were like, well, where are you? Because they're based in Australia. There wasn't really a means of doing it, so that would have been cool if I could have got it. But apparently it's very nice. So again, science media opportunity. This was a key connection between space tourism and the tabloid, oh my God, they're drinking space beer. And you can then link it again to Mars colonization. I mean, fortunately on Mars, you've got a bit of gravity to keep the beer down, so I don't think the carbon problem is going to be an issue. But there's going to be other things you're going to have to consider when you're drinking beer on Mars. Don't operate any heavy machinery. But again, it's not brewed in space. So this is the key thing here, and the key thing you have to really get across with the tabloids. They think it's beer being produced in vats in low Earth orbit. It's not, and you have to really point that out because we haven't actually developed a means of brewing beer in space. As I say, beer consumption on Mars won't have this wet burp problem, so you're lucky. So you can go on those dates on Mars and not be too embarrassed. Now, moving away from space beer, another nice link I found, and it was quite a heartwarming story. This was actually back in 2010, so I'm kind of cheating. This wasn't from the past year. But this was a very successful story. I just saw on a local newspaper from Chicago that this Mars rover, manned Mars rover, had won a design award, and it was alongside the new iPhone, the Mercedes-Benz, and this little design company based in Illinois. And I thought, this is weird to come up in a design competition. Why would a manned rover suddenly pop up in a design competition? Now, I found out which company was involved, and it was Montgomery Design International, and I assumed it was going to be a big company. I thought it was going to be an automobile company who just thought, okay, well, we can apply our technology to Mars and make it sound really cool and jump on the marketing train with this. Actually, it was a small company, and here you go. There's Spirit getting picked up by their rover. So we did have an option. We did have an option in reserve for it. So they sent me all these wonderful graphics of this rover, and I was thinking, they obviously, I don't really know the connection here between them and space. I mean, what does the design company know about the rigors of Mars colonization? But I spoke to them, and they're, of course, based in Illinois, Montgomery Design International. It's a father-son company. And when I got them on the phone, they were very enthusiastic that a space channel would want to actually speak to them because they hadn't spoken to anybody in space. And it was like, well, that's kind of an obvious thing for me, but I wanted to know their motivation for doing it. And I found out very quickly that they don't deal in this. They don't do Mars. They do agricultural equipment. They actually specialize in combine harvesters. And I was amazed by this, that they actually used their expertise in agricultural equipment into a Mars rover. So again, this is the Earth-Mars connection I'm trying to get at. So as you can see here, I mean, the key thing here is that it's got a combine harvester cab. And the reason for that is because they suddenly realized, well, if you're sitting on Mars, if you're roving around on Mars, you kind of want to have the best view possible. And of course, if you're on a combine harvester going across a field, you need to see what's right and directly underneath you before you crush it. So the same thing here, there's a lot of debris on Mars. So they thought, okay, we'll optimize the cab to be combine harvester design. They also came up with some very good ideas that they were going to standardize it. So actually, the whole thing kind of breaks up into standardized blocks. And it was also very space saving. So these things actually collapse and they actually form on Earth, on Mars. I can't remember now how they actually did this, but it collapses down, so it's very space saving in the transit to go to Mars. And they come in little blocks and they latch on, and actually they can be a part of a modular design of a base. And the whole point of this rover was to try and get man across the Martian surface over many, many miles for very long periods of time. So you're going to have astronauts living inside these cabs. So they also, so with that in mind, with the whole, you're going to spend a lot of time in a very what could be a very cramped situation with your colleagues, there's going to be a lot of psychological problems in a manned Mars rover. So they started thinking, okay, what can we do to mitigate these problems? And I saw some beautiful interior designs of these rovers. Lots of light blues, because they realized red is like a danger color to us humans. And of course, going to Mars, which is predominantly red, could make you very feisty if you're in that kind of closed environment with your colleagues. So the whole thing was built around psychological considerations for the astronauts. And it was a very beautiful, very clean feel, using all kinds of technology that NASA's, they actually use NASA as a source for a lot of their ideas. And I just thought it was nice. I mean, I don't think that they're going to send this to Mars, but it was actually a very nice practical application of Earth-based technology on Mars. So that blew up. I mean, this is another story that went crazy, because people suddenly found that connection. Wow, we're going to send combine harvesters to Mars, which would have been the tabloid interpretation. Also, more recently, another story, of course, you mentioned drugs in the title. People go nuts for it, especially space drugs. Wow, space beer, same thing. But there was a recent study on the International Space Station that suggested, and it's a quite a well-known fact apparently, that space drugs, well, drugs that are used in space or actually kept in space on the International Space Station degrade very, very quickly. They don't really know why. I mean, they're assuming it's because of the high radiation environment, but their shelf life is very low in low Earth orbit. And of course, they think it's high radiation, but it could also be the pre-packaging that NASA does and the other agencies do with their drugs. So they're trying to work out why these drugs become very useless very quickly. Of course, in space, it's a high-risk environment. We know this. So you're going to have microgravity impacts on your bones and muscles. So you need drugs to support you. As I said, drugs in space expire faster than on Earth. There's a load of unknowns. We don't know why this is the case. And so what I did with this particular story, and I think it was just a paper that came up in a press release from NASA, I think, and I just read the paper, and it was very boring. It was actually had a very technical title. And I thought, hold on, drugs are degrading that quickly in space. What's going to happen if we send the future Mars colonists to Mars, and halfway along somebody gets an infection, they're going to want some antibiotics, they take the antibiotics and they don't work? That's a problem. And so they need to find a solution to why there's this degradation of drugs in space. And of course, you can link it to any space endeavor where humans were involved. And again, any negative article about the rigors of space kind of brings out a positive feedback from the public. And again, we have this massive discussion in the comment boxes. I was able to get involved, Facebook, Twitter. Everybody was kind of interested in what, say if you get a headache in space, what do you do? And it was like, well, we don't really know unless you can get a fresh supply of drugs into space. So this is an issue. And I think that by this public outreach, we're able to get some ideas, and perhaps this is a good idea for NASA. In fact, what was mentioned yesterday, having a game where people can interact to actually find solutions to these problems that could actually help out. Yeah, and also that was a big take-home point, was readers generally see a bigger risk in not exploring space. So that was pretty cool. Okay, as I've got a little bit more time, I dropped this in at the end. You may remember the story of Brian the Bat, so I'm gonna bring him up again. But this ties in very heavily with social media, and I just want to kind of reiterate why it's important to use your Twitter accounts, why it's important to use Facebook, why it's important to use this new media, which actually isn't new anymore. This is established media. This is now the traditional media has to modify now, and they're doing a mixed job of it. But every news outlet now has got a Twitter account, and they're actually responding to readers' comments. They're actually responding to people who may have better ideas than them, and they may be able to put that through to the space agencies and the companies that are trying to push us deeper into space. So there's a lot of feedback here. But this was actually there's some statistics I found quite surprising from last year. The majority, this is a Gather Inc. Survey when they surveyed the 1,500 individuals last year. So this has probably increased, I reckon, in the past year. The majority of adults surveyed admitted to sharing news online through either Twitter, Facebook, MySpace, email, or bookmarking sites like Dig. 90% of respondents younger than 25 years old, and I think that's the key thing here. Youngsters are the future of Mars colonization here. So we need to be able to reach to this demographic here to get the news of the Mars Society and other Mars endeavors out there. So 90% of respondents younger than 25 years old use Twitter or Facebook to share news, double the amount of respondents over 40. So you over 40, so you need to get on it. And as I say, this was data from last year, and I think it's probably increased in the past year, because now we've got Google+, which is hoping to revolutionize bookmarking and social media as a whole. I don't know, I haven't really played with it yet, but Twitter is still very much alive and well. So, as an example of this social media phenomenon, I wanted to bring up Brian the Bat again. Basically, this hinged around the time when I started live tweeting shuttle launches, because traditionally, the shuttle launches, they were very mundane to our readership, and that really upset me, because it was like, we're sending this massive machine into space. For whatever its shortfalls, we got heroes on board that shuttle. We need to be celebrating this. We don't need to be celebrating these celebrities, these singers who take overdoses or whatever. Nobody's talking about these astronauts who are putting their life on the line for humanity, not just the United States, but for humanity, furthering science. And I really wanted to motivate the social media following that we had at Discovery News to really get them involved in more shuttle launches, to understand what's going on. So as you're coming up to the shuttle launch, we'd get on Twitter and we were watching the live feed, and we suddenly realized that other people are live tweeting as well, the fueling of the tank all the way up to launch, how well the launch is going, MECO and all this. And it's great fun, because you're suddenly got this established community around this one shuttle launch, and suddenly people from the public are going, oh, there's a shuttle launch, I didn't know about this, and then you get trending topics, suddenly it becomes a mainstream news event and people start paying attention. And I think it was a very good thing, and that's why I like doing it. It seemed a bit silly at first to be, just in text typing what I'm seeing on the screen when everybody else can see the screen, but not everybody knew there was a live feed in the first place. So I think it really enthused people. But of course, to make a shuttle launch interesting, you need to find that hook. You need to find the reason why it makes it interesting. And so recently we had that big experiment, the $2 billion particle detector going up to the International Space Station. That was the hook, because that was really, really cool. So I was able to hinge some really good science on that. But in this case, March 15th, 2009, there I was typing away. Suddenly we realized there was a passenger on board the external tank of Space Shuttle Discovery. And I said, there's a bat on the external fuel tank, and I came up with a great idea. I thought, well, should I name it? I got this thing from naming small animals Brian. So I called this little bat, this little fellow that was hanging on the side. You could see him shaking on the side of the fuel tank. I called him Brian, and suddenly that took off. Everybody was referring to this bat as Brian the Bat. How is Brian the Bat? What's going on? And as the time was ticking down towards launch, NASA even got involved. There were members of NASA that were saying, it's okay, they fly away. At launch, the bat won't be there. It would have flown away. It's all fine. And of course, that didn't satisfy anyone. It's like, no, he's still there. And so we're coming up to the 10-second countdown, and he's still there. And as time goes on, we suddenly realize he's going to fly with it. He wants to go into space. Suddenly, a very mundane, well, I call mundane, I call it the most exciting thing ever, a mundane shuttle launch suddenly got very, very interesting because it had an extra passenger. So I was receiving all this feedback on Twitter saying, where's Brian? You know, what's going on with Brian the Bat? Has he flown away yet? No, I think he's still there. You can see the little dot. And so people are getting really, really worried. And NASA was receiving an awful lot of posts about this bat. They didn't care about the shuttle launch. They didn't care about the astronauts inside. They wanted to know how that bat was doing. It didn't end well. Apparently, as the shuttle launched, you couldn't see it, and we just assumed, we were like, oh, relieved, it must have flown away. I think a couple of days after the event, NASA released infrared imagery of the external fuel tank, and sure enough, it was still attached at launch right here. NASA felt compelled to respond to the massive outpouring of grief with this statement. They were very careful not to upset too many people about it. But ultimately, that bat perished. But then that launch, it was STS-119, I think. STS-119 suddenly became famous for not the mission it was doing, because I hadn't got a clue what that mission was doing. All I knew, there was a bat that most likely died. I mean, people like to think he actually made it into space and made history for bat kind, but even so. But before I realized it, and this was really the key impact, this was the impact for me, and forever converted me to use Twitter, and I'm using it as a daily thing. I use Twitter all the time now, especially as a science writer. I find it key. But I actually had a follower called Geir Barstein, and he's a Norwegian, and I've been in touch with him a few times, and he obviously was following my Twitter account, and he thought, wow, this is quite compelling for a story. Obviously, he saw the hook because he's a very good journalist, and he went, oh, there's a bat, and his name's Brian. So on the Dagbladet, I think it's called, it's like the second largest newspaper in Norway. I mean, this isn't CNN or anything, but it's still pretty big, because this is national news. Actually made it into the print copy. So Brian the Bat, and he attributed it to me, Ian O'Neill, with Discovery News, and this was like brilliant. I mean, this is free advertising for my site. And of course, in headlines, there he is, Brian. I was attributed to naming this bat. Next day was kind of, I think it was the next day. It was actually the same day, I believe. The Daily Mail, the UK press, got hold of this story from the Norway press. And before I realized it, the major story, Brian the Stowaway Bat. They didn't attribute it to me, but I know it was me. So it hit the international press in the big time, and really the biggest one for me, and the biggest tabloid, The Sun. And I say, this was the good thing, because the tabloid press grabbed onto it, and they were able to, I mean, this is like, front page news on the website. And I was like, wow, I've made a shuttle launch that would barely get a mention on these websites, on these tabloid sites. Suddenly, it became popular over this little bat. And bless him, he did a good job. So I actually set up a Brian Bat Foundation, remembering the voluntary and accidental endeavors of animals in human spaceflight. And I ran a series of articles about animals in space, and I think it, generated quite a lot of interest. So it's quite a heartwarming story. So, just a few other wow moments. This is actually from last year, so there's been quite a few more since then. But I was featured on CNN when I was covering the Alcross impact, and that was when I was covering it on Twitter and Facebook. So that was really good. Got a lot of input from that. Got a lot of followers, and of course that furthered my brand. It was good for me because I was able to have more of an audience following my stuff. I've participated in Meteor Watch and Moon Watch. In fact, there's another Meteor Watch coming up, which is basically an online gathering of people that love meteors, and they basically go outside and they count how many meteors they find and then post it on Twitter. And it's really engaging because then you get a lot of feedback from the public asking what these things are, and I always make myself available as a scientist to be able to discuss what they are in scientific terms. Again, great outreach opportunity. I've met renowned scientists for dinner. I mentioned in the panel last night, I was invited to dinner at Mike Brown's house, the guy that discovered Eris and ultimately killed Pluto, my hero, and he just said, Ian, I'm having Christmas dinner. Do you want to come over? I really like your articles, and thank you for covering me on Discovery News. I was like, yeah, I'll come over. So that was purely through Twitter. And in fact, we actually met during the really bad fires. I think it was 2008 that were threatening Mount Wilson Observatory near Pasadena. And of course, he lives in Pasadena, so he was acutely aware of what was going on. So he was tweeting like a madman, keeping track of all the fires. And I just happened to get involved and I said, oh, well, Mike, I didn't know you lived so close. So that was really cool. I kind of co-authored a book. It's still waiting to do anything. It needs to be reviewed, but eventually that may see light of day. Because I actually met the co-author via Twitter again. He liked my stuff, and we just decided to do a collaboration together. In a roundabout way, it did actually get my job, because I was using Twitter to publicize the blogs that I was writing for Universe Today when I first came to the States. And it just so happened that Dave Mosher, my predecessor in Discovery News, latched onto my articles, really liked my writing. We formed a very real friendship through Twitter. I eventually met him in New York, and it turned out that he was leaving because he had a real cool job in Wired coming up. So he was leaving, and he wanted to leave it in good hands, leave the Discovery News in good hands. So he liked my stuff, and he said, Ian, would you like to apply for the job? And I went, yeah, why not? So through Twitter, got my job. That's pretty cool. And as I keep saying, if 140 characters, just on Twitter, this is just one platform. I'm not even talking about Facebook, Google+, all these other platforms that you can use. If it did that for me, it can further the message of the Mars endeavor that we're currently talking about on this convention. Okay, this is pretty much what I've just gone through. Yeah, this is the key thing. You don't know who follows you. It's like you post really cool articles about Mars. You get a lot of enthusiasts that will follow you. You get a lot of journalists that go, oh, this is a news source. As I say, I only use Twitter as my news source. If I want to get a tip on a really good story that's coming up, I've got so many scientists. I've got all the space administrations on tap, on my feed. All these research institutions, they're tweeting their stuff all the time. And I will get my news first from Twitter before you see it anywhere on the mainstream. So we can probably beat the mainstream by about 2 days. Sometimes the mainstream, they got their own sources. But for us, I find that Twitter is a phenomenal tool for me to be able to find these stories. And yeah, as I say, if you can acquire these journalists, perhaps you can have your own story about Brian the Bat. It's a grassroots effort. You want to try and get your message out to youngsters. That's really the key of the future. Youngsters are using social media more than ever. It's a no-brainer for me. This is just because I like blocky arrows, but there's a feedback loop here. Basically, science, social media. Somewhere in here is also the media. So it's a give and take relationship. We can, through the media, we can feed the public, but we can also feed sides, and likewise the other way. So I just think that social media is really the trend of the future. So conclusion, finding your Mars audience could be very easy. I think that's really the message here. You just need to find the right hook, and you need to find the right community. You need to build your own community. The cool factor, come on, what's cooler than wanting to settle on Mars? And this is one of the things that kind of frustrates me a lot, because scientists, enthusiasts often undersell their craft. Really shout it from the rooftops, because this stuff is cool. This is going to be the historic event when we actually get man on Mars. Really, it kind of sells itself. We're not selling insurance here. We're selling moving to another planet. It's easy to get bogged down in politics, and believe me, I've written so many political articles. Now, I'm not a political writer, but because of space is so politically motivated, I'm writing so many of them. And it's very easy to lose track, and I often get very depressed, because I am a space enthusiast, but I'm also in the media, so I see all the bad news as well. And it's very easy to get very downhearted by current economic crisis, by people's attitudes to space, by the public's attitude to space sometimes. Some of the comments I get, some of the emails I get, I've had death threats, believe it or not. Really, that was focused around me trying to present science behind the 2012 phenomena, but some of the feedback you get is horrible, and you just think, oh, why am I doing this? But never lose hope, because there's enthusiasts like us all over the world. Find hooks in your news, and I hope that I just demonstrated it with just a very small section of Mars articles from the past year that have really, got people interested, and also my 3 examples from very terrestrial, everyday things being applied to Mars colonization. Never be afraid to approach us. The science media as a whole, we need sources. I mean, we won't always run your story, but put yourselves on our radar. I mean, I love it when I get a random email from somebody I met in a conference, like from last year's Ohio conference. I received an email, saying, oh, this is what I've been doing. Do you think it would make a good story? Got them on the line, it made a good story. So this is the kind of thing that you need to do. You need to really get out there, really approach the science media and mainstream media. But science media probably understand it quicker than mainstream media might. But don't be discouraged if you get turned, knocked back. Just keep on pushing forward, because eventually you can have your Brian Batt moment. Create your voice through new media. So, run your own blogs. If you don't have a blog about Mars, you probably should do, because it's so easy now to start up your own blog. You've got a voice, you've got an opinion. Put that opinion to the fold. You wouldn't be here otherwise. And ultimately, outreach can influence political change, and that's really what I hope I can do by just being in the media. I mean, I'm traditionally a scientist, so I know what it's like. But now being in the media, I'm just trying to use my science knowledge to further the goal of science as a whole, and colonizing Mars. Now, I think just got a cool little movie. Any questions?
I've actually been in software for decades, but I even tried to get onto Facebook last year, but since they have no customer support, they didn't recognize my email address for some reason, so I could never do anything with it. But my question was, in terms of filtering, it's the old story of trying to drink out of the fire hose. You have these thousands of tweets coming in, say, on Twitter. So how do you even possibly get and identify the ones that you want to read that are of interest to you out of all the thousands that might be coming in? I have no idea how it works. Maybe you could just sort of rough out an explanation of how that actually works.
Yeah. Yeah, follow me. It's so easy. No, excuse me. That's the key thing with building a community. You don't want to build a community with people you don't want to hang out with. So really with like Twitter is a classic example. That is like the most honest form of communication I think I've come across, because you will follow people that become a good source of information. So for me personally, I've got a community of space enthusiasts that I follow. So it's enthusiasts, it's bloggers, scientists, I've got institutions, I've got space agencies, and I will follow them. And also people who have contacted me and they seem very friendly. it's just purely, if you act in a certain way on social media like you would do in normal life. So if I came up to somebody, shouted at them, they're not going to want to follow me. Whereas in social media, if you're just nice, you share, you ask questions, and suddenly you want to follow that person. And suddenly you have this feed. I mean, I follow probably, I think I've reached an optimal amount really, about 1,000 people I follow. They're not all tweeting at once, thank goodness. But I think if I had any more, I would probably water down my feed too much. So you kind of got to be careful who you follow, but certainly don't filter them out too much, because you don't know what kind of stuff they're going to bring to you. And you just kind of get used to it. If you join Twitter tomorrow, it'll take probably a few months for you to really get used to it and actually use it as a proper tool. So really start using it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, hi, Ian. So I'm with Quick Launch, and we're starting a gun project that's going to shoot things into low Earth orbit. Yeah. And it's kind of an exciting project, but I was kind of reaching out, and I thought, we're looking for, millionaires and billionaires, as most people are, to help us get this thing started. But I reached out to the pumpkin chunking crowd, because here's these guys that, shoot pumpkins, and it's just kind of, they spend $100,000 on a gun to shoot a pumpkin a mile, Yeah. And I thought, there's the same kind of people that we are, we're a little bit more extreme maybe, but it just seemed like it was kind of we had a common goal. Yeah. So I reached out to them, and they've been very helpful and very friendly, and I think we're going to help the guy win this year, so keep an eye on that in November.
Brilliant. Yeah, because I was hoping when I heard that program come up, it was like, oh, we're running that. But actually, if you watch it, it's kind of compelling. And if you put some science into it, even better. I'd be happy to watch it then. So.
Yeah, so check in November.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Cool.
I'm active on a social media site called Reddit.
Yep.
And it's a very large media site. There's hundreds of thousands of users. And I've been looking around on it, and there's very little centered around this goal of ours that we have. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge waste of people power, because on this site, I've even seen groups of people collaborating over years to bring together amateur rocket designs to put people on the moon in an amateur fashion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would really, really like to see more activity for these goals in a more centralized location on Reddit. I'd like to see a Reddit community built around the Mars Society, and if anyone would be willing to collaborate with me, then yes, please contact me and her.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, definitely, and Reddit is huge. I mean, that brings in a lot of traffic, just from a traffic point of view for us, because, ultimately we're run by advertising. It's a free site.
It's reddit.com.
And it's basically a social bookmarking site, similar to like Slashdot. I love Slashdot. It brings in a lot of traffic. I'm very happy with that. And yeah, it's communities already that you can tap into, refocus them onto Mars colonization. So it's a good idea.
Thanks.
So we don't have time for any more questions right now. I'm sorry, but because you guys only have an hour for lunch, so I wanted to let you go. But Ian, did you tell everybody what your Twitter is?
Yeah, it's where is it? It was on here, but it's gone. Yeah, Astro Engine, ASTROENGINE. So if you go onto Twitter, Astro Engine, follow me.
Okay, thank you very much. See you back at 1 o'clock.
I have to bring up Brian.
It's a great story.
Yeah.